how to create a slab ceramic mug with additional surface decoration and a handle. Okay, kids, it's time for our final exam. We are going to be cutting out this pattern and this pattern, and we are going to be creating a coffee mug, a slab coffee mug, and then doing surface decorations. So the way that I made this pattern is I actually took a real coffee cup and I cut it apart and I opened it up and I traced it, and this is a little bigger than the base needs to be. We will trim it down after we attach it. It's always better to go a little bigger and trim later. So what I've done is I took a paper coffee mug and I wrapped it in newspaper. But I wrapped it, A, I wrapped it neatly, and B, I wrapped it in such a way that I can remove the mug afterwards. This is very important because if you don't remove it afterwards, the clay is going to shrink, and when it shrinks, it'll crinkle the newspaper, but if the cup were left in there and it shrank, it would crack because it would not have any place to shrink. The cup is too stiff and the clay would crack. So we need to, when you wrap it, don't tape the piece to the cup. Tape it to the other end of the newspaper so that you can remove the cup afterwards, because if you can't remove the cup, the clay will crack. So anyway, I have cut out this piece and this piece, and now it's time for me to roll my slab. So what I did, if you look here, is I taped some cotton muslin to the table on 3 sides, and that gave me an opportunity to stretch out all the wrinkles. And I also have here I only taped like half of it so that I can put this flap over when I roll the clay. All right, so now I'm ready to roll out the clay. Here's my handy dandy rolling pin. The first thing that I'm going to do is I have these 2 pieces of wood, and I want to make sure that they're put the right distance apart from each other so that the rolling pins rollers can go on that surface. So as you can see, I can't make them farther apart from each other. So this becomes my, in between these 2 slats is the work area, and this is what ensures that my clay will end up nice and flat. I'm going to use the heel of my hand to press down the clay. And then I'm going to flip it over and use the heel of my hand to continue pressing. So you see these little holes, these little pinholes and stuff. That means the clay has not been wedged. This happens to be recycled clay. I wedged it a couple of times just to even it out, but I didn't wedge it to the point that I removed every single air pocket. And the reason why is because I'm hand building, not going on the pottery wheel. Therefore, complete wedging is unnecessary. I just need to wedge it to the point where the clay is nice and even, and not, you don't want it too sticky in one place and too hard in another, but to get every air bubble out is not necessary because I'm not going to need to be centering it on a pottery wheel. And the air will roll out as I roll the clay with a rolling pin. So I'm still just mushing it together. You can see how I took 2 pieces and overlapped them. And because the clay is somewhat sticky, I didn't need to slip and score them together. Just overlapping them like this is fine. It will end up with a pretty seamless slab. So then the next step is I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to flip it over the clay like so. I'm gonna smooth it out. I'll put the pieces of the slats of wood on either side, and the idea is to roll it away from myself to the point where the wood of the rolling pin is touching both slats. So you can see it's not touching either slat at this point, and I'm standing up and pushing away from myself. And you can see, let me just zoom out a tiny bit, you can see that the excess clay is going in that direction. So I start here, I push away from myself, and I press down as hard as I can. I don't have to worry about making the clay too thin in any spot because this slats of wood will stop me from pushing it too thin. The thinnest it will get will be the thickness of this piece of wood. Just make sure that you pick two slats that are the same thickness as each other. And now I've gotten to the point where it is touching the wood on both sides, and I have a fairly even slab of clay. If you feel any bumps, you can just start right before the bump and push away until it just rolls smoothly like you are a steamroller and this is a new asphalt road you've just smoothed out. Okay, so now it is time to use the potter's needle and cut out the pieces. Okay. Now I'm going to take this extra up, but I'm not going to crumple it up because I may be able to use it. Maybe I'll be able to overlap the different pieces and it won't be so much work to create the rest of it. So what I'm going to do is I'll take my little contraption that I made here, and the smaller part goes against the smaller part, and I'm just going to lift the edge and probably lift it a little bit here because you need to join it. Okay, so you see how I lifted the bottom of the mug a little bit? Okay, so that made it a little thinner at the bottom, and now it is the right circumference. So what I need to do is join these two pieces. Now, when you join any two pieces of clay, you cannot just normally mush them together because the only thing holding them together is the water and the clay, and it will fall apart when the clay dries and there's no more water in it. So what you have to do is you have to lock the pieces together like Velcro, and the way that you do that is by slipping and scoring. So I'm going to go up and down here and left to right here on this side, and then up and down and left to right on this side. Okay, and then I'm going to lock them together like two pieces of Velcro, and then I'm going to smooth. You can see that one side's a little thicker than the other, so just keep in mind you're going to smooth from the thicker side to the thinner side, and they will lock together. Okay, and somewhere around here I do have a rib. Yes. So I'm going to use this metal rib to smooth it out and make it seamless. The other thing that I can use is a very slightly damp sponge. You don't want too much water because you don't want the clay to get slimy, and you also do not want the clay to be weakened. So now that I have smoothed it out to the best of my ability, I'm going to remove the cup from the inside, but I'll keep the newspaper. Now the newspaper does get removed eventually. It doesn't get removed now, but it will have to be removed eventually. You can't put it into the kiln. You cannot put it into the oven with newspaper in it because the newspaper will burn up, which could set off the fire alarm, but also because newspaper needs oxygen in order to burn, and if there's not enough oxygen in the kiln, it'll pull oxygen out of the clay, and it could discolor the clay, and it could also shorten the lifespan of the kiln, causing us to need to replace elements and coils. So we will need to remove the newspaper later. Now I'm going to make the bottom, and you can see the bottom's a little too big. That's on purpose. You want the bottom to be a little bit too big. You will trim the extra off later. So we determined before that we didn't have enough room for the bottom. So we're going to need to take our clay. We're going to need to overlap it, like I said before. You can smooth it in. And because you're using a rolling pin and because the clay is fairly soft, it should join together without a lot of problems. If the clay were too dry or you weren't using a rolling pin, you might need to wedge this clay together, and then you might need to then roll out a fresh slab. But in this case, the rolling pin should meld the molecules of clay together fairly decently without having to slip and score and without having to roll an entirely new slab. So you see why I didn't crumple up my clay. I'm trying to save myself a little extra work. So I'm going to roll it. Again, I want to make sure that it's about this thickness and not too thin in any area. So let's put these pieces of wood here. That keeps it nice and even. And I think that's big enough, but you never know. Let me just flip it over on the back. Okay. Okay. It looks pretty even, and it looks like it is seamless, like it's not going to rip. So let's put this slightly too big piece of clay here. Let's cut it out. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our cylinder that we made before, and we're going to scratch and slip all along the bottom. Okay, now, very cute little hack that I have here. I'm going to go like this. I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to lift it up. And now I know exactly where to scratch and slip on this side because it left a little print. So I just go around and I scratch this circle in this direction and in this direction. If you don't have a fork, you can use a potter's needle. But the idea is to make sort of a waffle pattern or hashtag pattern. And the extra will be trimmed off afterwards. You can take your finger and tap some slip-on here, but don't smooth the slip-on, because if you do, you're getting rid of all your precious, precious scratch marks that you need in order for the two things to lock into each other. Now you line it up, Okay, and let me remove the extra. Okay, and now one of the things I'm noticing is that there's a seam here that I don't like. I don't really think that that's part of the design, so I'm gonna rub a little slip into it, and then I'm going to take my rib, and because there's newspaper shoved in here, the thing is not collapsing, so it holds it nice and stiff. Usually with slab work, you have to wait till it's leather hard to do something like this. The problem is you can't take a piece of clay and create a curved surface when it's leather hard. It'll crack. So in order to make it workable, stuffing it with this newspaper does help it to maintain its rigidity. Okay, and now I'm just going to push this on here, and you could trim it, but I have another idea, and that is taking my thumb and just pushing up from the bottom and sliding it onto the cylinder so that I make sure that my pot is watertight. So the idea is you don't want to have any holes or leaks. And scratching and slipping, while it's pretty good, there's always the risk that there will be a leak after you fire it. So doing this will help. And then just smoothing it out. Okay, now let's look at the rim. The rim also needs some smoothing. I don't want finger marks on the rim, so a slightly damp sponge can be super helpful. What you don't want is any sharp edges. You want it to all have a nice little curve to it because you don't want to cut your lip when you're drinking from your nice mug. You can dip your sponge slightly in the slip. Now, this is really super important. You have to be very careful with the water. If you overdo it with the water, it's going to collapse your pot. It'll be too wet, just like when you're throwing on the wheel. You don't want to overdo it with water. Now, let's talk about handles and also surface decoration. So, I taught you how to pull a handle, but that's not necessary for this mug because for this mug, I'm going to use what's called a handle mold. So this is a handle mold. So all you have to do is take a piece of clay and you have to roll it into a very even coil. Okay, if it's thick on one side and thin on the other, that is not good. It has to be super even. So you don't want any seams on it. You want it to just be a very even coil of clay. So I'm using 2 hands. I'm rolling it on the table on a smooth surface, and I'm making sure it's nice and even. And then you're going to mold it along the handle mold. And you need a little bit of extra in order to attach it. Okay? Not too much extra, but just a little. So the handle mold makes it really nice and stable. You don't need to let it set up for long. You want to be able to attach it the same day. But before I attach the handle, I want to talk a tiny little bit about surface decoration. So let's see if I can look at this and figure out what I want to do for surface decoration. This is a piece of lace. This is a lace doily that's crocheted, and I'm putting it on here. So I'm not thrilled with this. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this texture, but I usually do like to work with stuff instead of just saying I messed up and starting over. So let's see, what I could do with this lace is I could make it like the frill of a frilled lizard. Or maybe I'll add a beak and make a crazy little baby bird. Again, I can do that because I've got newspaper stuffed in here, so it's not going to come out. The whole thing's not going to collapse. And I'm going to, and very often when I'm working with clay, I'm making stuff up as I go along. But, you know, you sort of have to work with the piece of artwork you have, not the piece of artwork you think you deserve. So right now I have this mess and I want to turn it into something interesting. So what shall I do? Thinking some sort of monster face. And again, notice I did not mush up my slab from before. So because of that, I have the flexibility to use these leftover slabs. Okay, I'm going to take this. I'm going to take some of the slip, put it on here. I'm going to scratch. Always scratch both sides. So perhaps it needs some very bulging eyes. So you don't have to worry about wasting paper or supplies because everything can be recycled if you're not thrilled with the results. Now I'm starting to see the texture as something interesting instead of a mess up. So let's see what I can get here. Again, the lace might have looked better if I had tried to add it on prior to assembling my pot. Like for instance, if I had rolled it on with a rolling pin, which I didn't do because I forgot. So I could go on, I could add feathers, I could add texture, I could do all sorts of stuff. Right now I'm not going to do that because I would like to show you, on the other hand, how to create the handle. So the handle should be attached, I would say, on the side opposite the decoration to give it a little bit of a balance. Okay. So I'm going to attach it here. I'm going to bend it a little so it looks kind of like an ear. So let me just cut off the extra. And the trick with handles is you just scratch and slip the top part because you're never 100% certain where the bottom part is going to land. So I'm scratching here in 2 directions and here in 2 directions, and I'm going to join them a little bit below the rim. So the trick with handles is you don't want them to sag while they're drying, and you also don't want the top of the handle to come higher than the rim of the cup. So I'm just going to go like this. So it looks kind of like a little bit like a human ear. I'm going to go like this to make sure it is on straight. And I don't want any of my slipping and scoring to show. So I'm going to do some smoothing to get rid of that. So it needs to be a functional handle. So I'm going to put my hand inside it. Don't lift it. It will break. But you can put your hand inside it to kind of get a feel of the grip. And then the next thing I would put it upside down to make sure the top of the handle isn't higher than the rim. If you think about your mom washing dishes, and she needs to put it to drain upside down on the drain board, she's not going to want this handle in the way. Weird baby bird for the win. And that was not something I was planning. It just happened because I used the lace and it looked terrible and I was trying to figure out what the heck to do with it. So I'm going to cut out some feathers. So I got some slip on here. If it's a small area, you can just use the slip with a potter's needle. And maybe I will add some feathers to this. But yes, you can add all sorts of textures and do all sorts of fun things. Use all sorts of tools. You can finish in a couple of days, or you can take all week. You can make one mug, or you can make a whole set. This assignment is very flexible. Very, very important, though, is that when you are done, in order for me to fire it, I have to be able to remove the newspaper. If I can't remove the newspaper, I can't fire it. And one of the requirements of this assignment is that your artwork survive a firing. So here's my little crazy bird mug. Here's the handle. It's not finished. I'm going to keep working on it, but you get the gist of these. Still not done, but I wanted to add that after you remove the newspaper, you're going to have to go onto the inside, and you're going to use a wooden knife like this, using the curved edge. You're going to have to go to the inside, and you're going to want to smooth out the inside. You may want to wait till the next day to do this, but the idea is you're getting rid of any seams, any scratch marks, and I would wait till it's closer to leather hard, maybe the next day. Go in with a sponge and see if you can get rid of any bumps, seams, scratch marks, any unevenness on the inside of the mug, and that's because it makes it harder to wash if the inside surface is not smooth. Like I'm going to be smoothing this out once it's set up a little. Makes it harder to wash, and you don't want to have any nooks, crannies, or pockets on the inside of the mug that could harbor germs. So he's not finished yet, but this is my little crazy bird mug. And again, it's required for this assignment that you use surface decoration. You could just stamp something into it. You could add texture. In my case, I wanted to add texture using a little lace doily. It ended up looking absolutely terrible, but I used the texture and I thought maybe I would make a dinosaur with a frill around its neck, but then it turned out to be sort of this crazy, odd bird. So sometimes you plan one thing and you end up doing another, but you are required to add some sort of surface decoration to this assignment. And the mug has to survive a firing without anything coming off. It has to be able to be watertight and dinnerware safe, and you will need to be able to drink out of it. So we're going to be firing this 2 cone 6 stoneware. So I'm not finished with it yet. There's some smoothing and stuff I have to do, some details I have to add, but this is your final exam project and you have all this week to finish it.